Yeah, yeah. But now, here in Spain, everything is flexible. And later than in Europe, in the rest of Europe.
That's why I was later also this morning. No, it's funny, I'm not used to Google Maps, so whenever I look on my mobile Google Maps, I think it's the direction I have to go, and it doesn't, I don't know how they have north-south directions different, or, because I have a very good orientation. So.
Ay, tú.
I have a mini speech. I
Me
like
too,
it
me
short
too.
and precise. So is this a medium? Did you manage to get some?
I think so.
Really?
Aquí, adelante ven, speak. Okay.
Do you like it?
I wonder how they connect, but everybody has such a particular view on things. It's so difficult to have the website for everybody's taste, and that's good.
Venga. Quina hora és?
Les 12:02.
Anem superbé.
Més o menys.
Que dic que la sala està prou bé.
Sí, em sembla que han vingut dos grups de classe de no sé quin màster. Un el que portava l'1 i no sé l'altre quin és.
Molt bé. Bon dia a tothom. Hola, no. Bon dia. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to the European Institute of the Mediterranean. Thank you very much to be with us today. And I would like to start this launching event to thank the government of Catalonia, the City Hall of Barcelona, and the Spanish Minister of Foreign Affairs, to their continued support to the activity of the IEMed and that allow us to accomplish our mission. And our mission is to promote as much as possible the relation, the cooperation, the linkages between the two shores of the Mediterranean. Also, our mission is to attract attention, as much attention as we can, to the EU institutions, governments, subnational and local authorities, and civil society to the Mediterranean region, to the Mediterranean affairs. Over the last 30 years, the European Institute of the Mediterranean worked in the region, and the situation in the Mediterranean has changed over these 30 years a lot, is the less we can say. It has been a securitization of the IEMed relations. And at the same time, we assisted to the rise of violent extremism, populism, radicalization, and different kinds of discrimination phenomena. The IEMed, the European Institute of the Mediterranean, has adapted to this new situation, and we conducted different research in this field. Surveys, IEMed surveys with a Euro-Mediterranean scope. We organized seminars. We have, you had the opportunity to see some of our publications, some the articles that we have devoted to these different issues. But building on this IEMed background and with the rich expertise of our partners, we conceived this Connekt project that is funded by the European Commission. And I would like to highlight 4 main characteristics of this project. The first one, the interdisciplinary. It's a very rich consortium. It's not only academic, have universities, we have think tanks, civil society organizations, and also local authorities on board. Also, the multi-dimension. We will work at the macro, meso, and micro levels, paying special attention to youth, indeed, and to women as actors and not only as objects of research. We have, and this is the third characteristic of our project, a clear de-securitization approach. And the fourth one, that we will focus, in addition our work, in addition to the applied research, to the prevention, and to practical recommendations. I think this is indeed, we will develop a little bit more what are the main characteristics of our project, but I think these are the 4 that define the best our initiative. Thank you very much, and now I pass the floor to Kerstin Wild to do the introductory remarks. Kerstin, she's project advisor for projects on employment and social inclusion in various contexts at the European Commission and the Research Executive Agency.
Thank you.
Kerstin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, dear Director General, Mr. Ferré, dear Director Bertrand, dear press colleagues, students, I see many, and dear scientists, we were already talking this morning. Thank you very much for this kind invitation. Beautiful building, beautiful weather. It's always a pleasure to come to these kinds of events, and especially as Connekt has managed to write a proposal which was really outstanding and very good. And they have now 3 years, a good 3 years, almost 3.5 years, to do their research. And we are very keen in the European Commission and also in the European Executive Research Agency to follow on the project, really to monitor it, and to see the first outputs and outcomes, and to talk with our scientific reviewers and the scientists about the progress in the implementation. With this call for proposals, the scientific proposals here in this core topic, we are really looking for academic, empirical, and interdisciplinary research, as Mr. Ferré already said. And our aim is really to understand the various factors, such as historical factors, geopolitical factors, socioeconomic, ideological, cultural, psychological factors, and also demographic factors that drive conflicts, and maybe also violent extremism in the Middle East and in the Balkan states. As the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, announced some few days ago in the Commission Work Programme 2020, a union that strives for more, she said, I'm citing, "We need a stronger Europe in the world. Europe needs to be more geopolitical, more united, and more effective in the way that it thinks and acts." And this links here with this project and the geographical focus. European diplomacy will continue to be essential. And with reference to the Western Balkans, closer to home, the EU is committed to deepening its partnership with the Western Balkans, a region with which it shares so much. Also, the Connekt project has taken a very important stance in focusing in its research on the young people in the Middle East and in the Balkan states. And it clearly puts a focus on our future generation, and it will certainly also be able to put research results into a life course perspective. And this means clearly indicating the outcomes to be expected if young people's social, economic, social and political situation is not changed. And Connekt emphasizes the role of young people in states and also in democracies and how they can participate, or which leeways they search for participation. I have really the pleasure to be a project advisor for many projects dealing with young people. And it's not only doing interviews with young people, but it's really co-creating with young people. They are part of research. They should understand the research that is done. And in my experience, it is a very, very positive way of doing research. With young people, it's very enriching, it's vivid, it's thought-provoking, it's empowering, and it's a very lively co-creation process with the young people if you involve and engage with them. And my deepest wish is that young people also feel an ownership in being part in research and also in the results. We in the European Commission are, and I guess we all should be in favor in a research for and with citizens, beyond the high-quality research that we expect to be implemented with EU funding. EU funding, to conclude, offers researchers in the EU and even beyond, as you can see here in the consortium, an outstanding cooperation. Here in this project, researchers from 13 countries work together and deduct then from their findings on the ground. This is an EU added value. I have in almost no national research funding such an opportunity to collaborate, and you don't have such an opportunity for impact for policy making and politics. We in the EU offer very soon the biggest research funding opportunity worldwide. And I think the EU makes an impact in life, and we are looking forward to Connekt's research results. We are all citizens of the EU, and we all should build it together in a very constructive way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerstin. Now, Jordi Morenes has the floor to make a brief presentation of the project.
Thank you, Josep. Bon dia, and thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to see many colleagues and friends who have been sharing in the past with Lourdes and me these problems, these questions about how analyzing and explaining the phenomenon of radicalism and violent extremism. The first thing I would like to explain is why I joined scientific coordination. Really, I cannot remember when exactly we started to work on this issue. Probably because all started in the very informal way, sharing ideas, criticism, and jokes, approaches over how the phenomenon of radicalization was being constructed and addressed, not only in Spain, Catalonia, but in Europe in general. We found ourselves so many times on the same page concerning the approach to violent extremism that when the opportunity emerged, we thought that we should try to materialize our discussions and conversations in a research project. This is when we started to think and structure the idea, merging the work we had previously done in sometimes different geographies. Our complementarity in terms of knowledge and expertise and friendship is obviously enriching the project, and we share a very clear motto. We need to join forces and connect as much as possible. Otherwise, it will be impossible to face such a huge challenge ahead of us. What is the project? Connekt is a research and action project that will analyze 7 pre-identified drivers: economic deprivation, territorial inequalities, religion, transnational dynamics, digital consumerism, social political grievance, and educational, cultural, and leisure opportunities. These drivers drive a comprehensive multi-dimensional map of drivers of violent extremism among young aged 12-30 years in MENA and Balkans. The mapping of drivers will allow us to engage with prevention detached from security approaches from a local community and civil society-based perspective. Well, since picture is better than 1,000 words, I think we all were appreciated to see what the project is about in this video. I don't know if it is prepared. Yeah?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jordi. And now we will watch a short video concerning the project. with the roundtable discussion. So I ask Lourdes, Marco, Tasnim, Luzim, and Corinne to reach the stage. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the second half of this event. This is the part where we want to start discussing with the main elements of the project. As you have seen, this project is mainly 8 target countries, 4 in the Middle East, North Africa, 4 in the Balkans. It's 7 drivers that will be analyzed, and particularly not only their weight as drivers, but also the interplay that is established among different drivers. 7 drivers, 3 levels of analysis, macro, meso, micro, and obviously many questions, many research questions. So some of these research questions that we have in the project, we wanted to start discussing them and sharing some of these ideas with you. And for that, we asked some of the members of our consortium to come up with us, okay? Obviously, it's impossible. We are 14 members in this consortium, so it's impossible to have a discussion in half an hour that might be productive. So we have a sort of sample. Okay, we have representatives from universities, representatives from civil society, representatives from the Middle East, from North Africa, and from Europe and the Balkans. Okay, and for us, we have this discussion with Corinne Torrekens from the Université Libre de Bruxelles, from Belgium, with Marco Pinfari from the American University of Cairo, with Tasnim Shirshi from the Jasmine Foundation from Tunisia, and with Lulthim Pesi from Kipret from Kosovo. So the first thing I wanted to do, and I will just have, if you can put me the drivers, get out, we will have a look at the 7 drivers, and I would like to focus on one couple of questions. The first one would be, I mean, to what extent religion is the main driver? So to what extent have we overemphasized the role of religion as a driver, or is it really an important, undeniable driver that is more important than the rest of drivers? On the other hand, does religion, the link between religion and national belonging, play a particular role in the field of extremism and radicalization? So with this idea of the role of religion and the role of identity, belonging, and religion, I would like to ask, and maybe I will start with Corinne, if you like, to ask you, what do you think about religion and as a driver, and what do you think about this link between religion and identity and national belonging?
Okay, thank you very much for this. It is a very good question because it is a very contentious question, the link with religion, with what we call mainly religious fundamentalism, especially regarding the Islamist fundamentalism. It is a highly contentious debate, and highly discussed debate also in the scientific and academic literature. If you know a bit what is the public debate for the moment in France, for example, if you know it, it is highly contentious. And also the link with identity, the belonging to the national society, also with citizenship, with the very feeling of citizenship. And I think it will be one of, for me, one of the main interesting aspects of Connekt is the fact that we have different countries with different contexts, but also with different histories regarding not only extremism, but also with democracy, with political pluralism, and so on. So it will be very interesting to see how all these different contexts will enrich and nourish the academic and scientific world regarding religious fundamentalism, because we will be able to test this hypothesis in the project and during the project.
Thank you, Corinne. Lulthim, how do you see the issue? Particularly, I think it's very interesting, the issue of national belonging, particularly you that are coming from Kosovo.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be here and to be part of this consortium. I'm very pleased to be in Barcelona. I would like, first of all, to say a few things about demographic composition of Kosovo in order to understand what I'm going to say in my further elaboration. Kosovo has around 2 million inhabitants, and more than 90%, around 95% are Albanians. And the rest are Serbs, Turks, Bosnians, and a tiny community, we call them Gorani, but they identify themselves in different ways, sometimes as Macedonian, sometimes as Bulgarian. So this issue of identity, in the end of the day, is how people do feel about themselves. The identities, I think, are not imposed, but they get reshaped by the social conditions and the other circumstances which do influence us. Regarding religious composition of Kosovo, so it is around 95% are Muslim, nominally Muslim. 1.7% are are Catholics, and the rest are do belong to Christian Orthodoxism. But moving right now to explain a bit the relation between religion and national identity. Albanians are maybe the single people in the Balkans which do have a secular nationalism, a nationalism which is not connected to religion. For Albanians, so to be an Albanian, it means that first you are Albanian and the religion is of personal issue of personal belief or of secondary importance. And this has been so since the late 19th century when at the time Albanian revivalists took an effort to build Albanian nation. When it comes right now, this is the situation in Kosovo. But when it comes right now to relation between religion and nation, in essence, in Kosovo, this is a very contradictory issue, because you may well know that there have been quite a large number of foreign terrorist fighters who went from Kosovo to the conflicts in the Middle East. But in essence, in our findings, in the research that we did, we have found out that actually these people who went there, in essence, they don't feel Albanian. They feel as a part of what used to be called nowadays a part of Muslim Ummah, because they have rejected how to say their national belonging as Albanian. So this might be a quite interesting issue which can be further analyzed and studied as maybe a special case. So this is more or less.
Thank you, Lulthim. Marco, what's the vision from the Middle East, from Egypt, concerning this driver of religion?
Well, it's an interesting big topic. Towards, it's quite dangerous in a way. Try to be, how can I say, diplomatic, given the circumstances. No, I mean, there's obviously an argument about the connection between religion and extremism that goes to the idea that religion tends to create these cosmic wars, right? So this opposition between different absolute goods and absolute evil, like that sort of polarity. And also religion also includes the reenaction of ritual violence often, and we do see that quite a lot in the region, not necessarily in Egypt, but elsewhere. What I think this project will bring to this understanding is one very important thing, which is, I mean, it's not entirely clear from this model because you see all of these factors somewhat in parallel, but it's clear also from our conversation that religion is an intermediate variable to a large extent. So you do have factors, and you have as well here in the graph when you, or in the scheme, you talk about territorial inequality, socioeconomic inequalities. One of the big things that this project can bring also to how states like Egypt at the governmental level understand terrorism and extremism is that there's factors that cause certain political and ideological positions to come into being, and religion can be a medium through which those are developed and articulated. There's also a second point about the relationship between religion and national belongings that you mentioned. When you have a country like Egypt that has, or has had, we're not entirely sure because there's no official reporting from Sinai, as we all know at the moment, but it used to have a branch of this so-called Islamic State on its territory. So religion can put the patriotic or national belonging of individuals to the test by creating an alternative political entity to which people declare their allegiance, in this case, an alternative state, right? But then, at the same time, the answer to that, and again, this is something that our project will focus on, is not just repression, because at the source of it, there is a problem about what it means to be Egyptian, what it means to be a member of the region. So there's a problem about the articulation of what nationalism means in a country like Egypt. So the solution to that a lot of individuals have found, not having political science language an option for voice, they went for exit. So they expressed it outside of the mainstream political process, because arguably there isn't any effective political process at the moment. So by articulating the sense of belonging, we also understand why you resort to certain ideologies in the end.
That's very useful, because I wanted to ask Tasnim, why do you think it's important to include these political grievances as a driver? And in fact, which is very important, is our project is not giving these drivers as fixed drivers. It's challenging the drivers. So the idea is testing them and seeing to what extent, finally, at the end of the research, they will be considered like full-fledged drivers or just elements interacting with more relevant drivers. So the idea is why socio-political issues matter or are considered at the beginning as a driver. Tasnim.
Okay, thank you. So my answer is that first, as you said, it's interesting from a research point of view to challenge the dominant explanations of radicalized behavior. So usually we describe it as motivated mainly by religion. And the problem is that when you examine the discourse of the radicalized, you discover that underlying that reference to religion, there are deeper, frustrations and a sense of unfairness and injustice about deeper grievances, economic, social, and political. So they range from unemployment to, perceived corruption, the corruption of the elite, to also failure of the existing models of development, to the failure of reform also. So it's very important here to, notice that empirical research does not support the idea that religion is the main motivator. It is part of the picture, but it's not the main motivator here, and it is important to analyze the relationship between these elements. Also, it is very important when we mention and focus on the importance of political, economic, and social grievances to understand that there's no direct link, actually, between, economic deprivation and political grievances with violence. The link is indirect, actually. Why? Because when you notice that in some environments, those who are radicalized are not necessarily all, economically deprived. And, most of them, like in Tunisia, 75% of them are youth, but also 65% of them are highly educated. So it's not about, the classical image that we have about, poverty linked to a low level of education. So this indirect link has to be, given emphasis through empirical research. This indirect link
in our experience, I represent a civil society organization here, so it's important in the way we deal with young people, in the several interactions and focus groups with them, we noticed that the link is actually what explains radicalization and spurs radicalization is blocked participation. So it's the inexistence of spaces where these young people can express that frustration and where that frustration is channeled in a positive way. And since the project is actually focusing not only on research but also in action, so I think the policy recommendations for prevention should go also to how can we, on the three levels, the individual, take care of the psychological effects of these grievances, and allow a sense of self-esteem to be formed for these young people in order to, protect them. Also, on the level of their social roles, enable citizen formation. What is their roles as citizens? Because that is an important channel for positive participation, positive citizenship. And thirdly, on the level of the community, look at how can we strengthen resilience in the dynamics within the community.
That's a very important thing, and that allows me to go to the second part, or the second axis of the research and the discussion, which is the dilemma between detection or identification and prevention. I mean, we have stressed a lot during the project this idea. In fact, we emphasize a lot in the research the work at the meso level, at the community level, and particularly on prevention. Marco, why is so important this meso level in the research? And also I ask him because he will be the one leading this level, this empirical research level. So why do you think when we have to stress in this level?
Well, there's several reasons, obviously. For those of you who are from an academic background, you might also know that most of the research on terrorism has historically focused either on individual level drivers, so often like the psychology, social psychology element, sometimes, which we do find also in the literature and also in policy in Egypt and other countries, the assumption that individuals might be crazy, might be under drugs, and those arguments. And then you have the macro level determinants, which might be related to broad issues related to whatever, authoritarianism, colonial, post-colonial relationships, and the like. All of these are important, if you wish. The macro level might determine why terrorism happens or why certain types of violent expressions happen in the first place. The individual level might explain why it happens in a specific moment in time, why a specific guy, why a specific month. But if you want to understand how those grievances get articulated, you need to work at the level of what we call the meso level, so at the level of social groups, at the level of political communities. And again, this very important point about articulating a grievance, right? And I think there's a common sense here that you might have a grievance that is fully legitimate, and not having the chance of expressing it puts you in a position where you turn towards a violent ideology sometimes. And the phase in which that transition happens is in between the macro issue and the individual decision, which is where we're trying to do, or focus, I think, substantially, because it's in two different phases, right? We're going to come back both at the beginning and towards the end of the project on this. There's also a second point here, which is this is also the level at which you can make the most impact in a way, because obviously the macro level issues, sometimes you cannot do much, and one may say we should not even do much. We're not in the business of imposing a regime type over a government. I mean, that's not our business in a way. At the same time, individual level, there are individual level issues. So, I mean, we cannot engage with every single person that might be taking certain decisions, but we can engage with social groups, we can engage with communities, we can engage with processes through which those grievances get articulated.
Thank you, Marco. And now I go back to Tasnim just 1 second, because I know that you were very much focused on this community level. We were very much interested also with the driver, with the cultural, leisure, educational driver, and on the need in working at the community level. What, in your opinion, I mean, to what extent it makes the difference regarding what is being done in the field of violent extremism and particularly prevention.
Thank you. So, why is community important? This is the main issue here. So I think that we focus usually on individual paths towards radicalization. And from a European perspective, there's a focus also on the national level, national data, and which environments are more conducive to radicalization. What is left out here usually is the meso level, the level of the community. And if you focus on, you examine the radicalization path, an important part of the radicalization is the isolation of the individual. It's cutting off the individual from the community ties, discrediting the religious authority, discrediting any moral authority that could be, holding the individual from engaging in, violent extremism. So here, it's common also this aspect of isolation is common not just with the radicalized violence, but also with other types of criminality. There's always this isolation and creation of an alternative community. So we have to focus on the community level. Also, it is, I think, for more efficient programming, PVE programming, we need to focus on the relationship between the individual and the community. Why? Also because the drivers, they work differently in different environments. We have had research in the past year and compared different communities and have seen that the same drivers do not lead to radicalization according to the strength of community bonds and community ties. So this is an important element to take into account and create, I think, a dynamic, framework for research that can adapt to these specificities in the different communities and take that into account.
Thank you, Tasnim. In fact, Connekt grants a very important role to youth and women in the field of prevention, not as target of prevention, but as agent of prevention, as a relevant, legitimate voice in constructing prevention strategies. And taking into account that we have a quite young audience here and women's presence in here, I wouldn't skip the opportunity to ask you, to what extent do you think that there's a specific role that has been neglected until now for youth and women in the field of prevention of radicalization and violent extremism? Do you think that we have invested at least something in this field, or that we are starting from scratch to build some more legitimate voices in prevention? Who wants to deal? Yeah, Luthin, please.
I can say something about youth, and it's because once upon a time I used to be ambassador of Kosovo to Sweden, but I was covering Iceland, and also from Stockholm. And I've learned in a very interesting experience in Iceland, which they did have with youth, because youth used to drink a lot. So the becoming drunk was like a fashion in Iceland. And how community organized in order to prevent youngsters to drink. First of all, they started a community organization at the very local level by parents. They were not letting young children to enter into the bars and to get drunk. But what the authorities of Iceland did after that, they started to engage massively youngsters into the sport activities. And since then, it's interesting, right now, Iceland is a kind of big power in soccer, in European soccer. And the genesis of that started exactly at that time. So it was during the 80s and the end of 80s when this started. What I'm trying to illustrate with this case of Iceland, that how important it is to engage with youth. And it is very important, youth, youngsters, to have channels of, how to say, of letting out their energies out. Those energies can go in positive way. They can go also in destructive, if I may say, actions. But I would like also to add in something regarding radicalization in this case. We shall not forget the ideological role of religions. If they, at a certain point of time, they take the role of the ideology. Like, for example, how the doctrine of Wahhabism moved into an radical ideology, we will not understand the very nature of radicalism that we are facing nowadays. And we shall not forget also in the social context when those radical movements started within the Islamic world. I had to educate myself in the recent years about it. So if we just look at the first radical preachings within Islam are of the 13th century, people who are educated in this field, they know that Taymiyyah, who used to be a scholar of Islam at the time, started to preach about jihad, about radicalism. What happened in the 12th century? The Islamic world was actually moving into the collapse. Then, just another point, Wahhabism. It is the end of the 18th century and beginning of the 19th century. It is the time when the collapse of Ottoman Empire started. And we do have recently what started with Bin Laden and ended up with ISIS. I think that it's very important to understand historical and social social roots of Islamic radicalization for the job that we are doing.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that we will not only focus on religion processes of radicalization, we will take into account other sorts, other types, different types of radicalization. And one of the challenges that we have is that we are dealing with 8 very different countries. So each national context will offer diverse variables, diverse elements for the research, and our challenge will be to have a comparative approach. And one of the main challenges, as we are here in Barcelona, and we are leading this project from an institution which is based in Barcelona, is to what extent this project will be useful for us. And this is probably what you are asking yourselves. I mean, how this will benefit my life, okay? And this is something that Connekt has also taken into account very carefully. I mean, to what extent Europe can benefit from the research? To what extent, I mean, and that's a question that I address you all, to what extent Connekt can contribute to the knowledge and the savoir-faire and the strategies that Europe has regarding violent extremism? To what extent it is important to invest for Europe in regions such as the Middle East, North Africa, but also in the Balkans? And to what extent it is important compared to other global actors that will try to have also something to say in this field? And I'm particularly thinking about the US, for example, in the Balkans, and to what extent the US is a very active actor in the field of preventing or countering violent extremism in the Balkans. So to what extent project will be useful for our daily lives and for European citizens? So who wants to start? Corinne, for example? Any idea from Europe?
Sure. Easy one. No, I'm sure we, even being an academic, we do not invest our times and our energy in such a project if we are not convinced that it is important not only for research and academic literature, but also because it is important in terms of policy recommendation. And one of the most aspects for me is just fostering collaboration. It was quite interesting, the first meeting that we had this morning. We don't know each other, but we are already learning to know what is the context, the precise context of each partner. So this is one dimension, and I would like to come back a few seconds on the role of women and youth. We are engaged in the Connekt project to involve them in the project. Then they are European citizens, and one goal, one objective of the project is to give them back a voice and a role regarding these, the issue of radicalization and of extremist violence, where sometimes women and youth are most often considered as victims. And we would like to, not to go in this way, but instead to give back them a role, a voice, and to involve them in the project. And I think it is a very, very quite difficult, but very interesting goal of the project.
Thank you. Yes, Tasmin.
May I? So I'm not European, but I might venture. So I think one of the most important aspects of the project is that it links action and research. So ultimately, this is going to be very cost effective at all levels. We are going to, by linking research to action, we can have, policies that are more efficient. These policies will be based not on theories or, generalizations, but on more empirical data based on comparative studies. So this time, I think this is part of the innovation also aspect of this project, that it is multidisciplinary, it addresses, several stakeholders, but at the same time, will give a voice to the populations who are concerned. They are not going to be only subjects of study. They are going to have a voice. They are part of, the whole research in terms of the design of the research and the outcomes of this research.
Thank you, Tasnim. Lutfim?
I would like to say something about US.
Yeah, I was expecting that.
Well, US has played a major role in the Balkans regarding fighting radicalism and dealing with the issues of foreign terrorist fighters. They've been very much involved actually since after September 11th, when they started to track different organizations in the region which have had links with Al-Qaeda. I'm talking about hard security right now, what they did. And they've been pretty good on this, I must say. And the number of terrorist attacks in the region have been avoided by capturing people in due time. Because when you fight terrorism, you need only once to fail. And terrorism, as you may know, they need only once to have luck. But in the Balkans, they had not luck. In terms, after the ISIS came to the surface, then the involvement of US has been tripled at least in the region. They have helped all the countries of the region to build the structures and to draft the strategies for countering violent extremism. So in all strategies in the region which are written and right now are official documents of different governments starting from Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, Montenegro, and Macedonia and Albania do have American fingerprints. When it comes, and I think that our project has a very special value in this case because it will be of benefit not only to the policy makers and decision makers in Brussels, but also and to those in Washington, if the data will be open to everybody. Because there is, in my opinion, all these academic and practitioners' efforts, they have to be merged in order to get the best effects. And the comparative advantage of our project is exactly because it is comparative in its nature. And I think that it can bring a lot to the understanding the best ways how to deal with the radicalization and violent extremism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luli. Marco, do you want to add something?
Not much. I mean, I think I fully agree with what Tasneem has said. I mean, I think we lack nuanced understanding of these processes beyond, I think, the generalizations that tend to be made specifically from this side of the Mediterranean. I'm Italian myself. I've lived in Egypt now for more than 10 years. And I still see that very much, and even like the top journal, like the top newspapers in Italy, they make macroscopic mistakes sometimes, and just even reporting very basic information about the country, just getting a name wrong, a process wrong. And in this case, we're trying really to counter that. We're trying to approach the whole issue the other way around in a way. We're having a consortium where we are able to work on the ground and then hopefully share findings that are based on that research with our colleagues also in Europe. There's also a second point. I mean, I do obviously work in an academic institution. And as far as I know, no comparative analysis really of the MENA region with the Balkans has been undertaken at such a level. I understand there's other projects that are being funded as part of the same call that will do a similar job. But I have to say, even compared to their consortia, ours is particularly inclusive. So we have a great chance, even at that level, to provide comparative data that simply don't exist, neither to the practitioner community, to the policy-making community, and to the academic community.
Thank you. And this is mainly how we are going to end this discussion and open the question and answer time with you, because one of the main things is that, as this roundtable discussion was entitled, filling the gaps in research in violent extremism is something very important. And this is one main huge gap, which is the lack of comparative analysis between cross-regional analysis, is something that we want to overcome with the results of our research. And now I think it's a time for you to raise questions on the project, on the discussion, on curiosities, thoughts, and I will invite all other members of the consortium to answer if they feel like, and also my co-scientific coordinator, Jordi Moreras, if he wants to answer back. But this is the time, so don't be shy, and feel free to make your questions either addressed to the panel or addressed to other members of the consortium. So no one, now it's a time that we have to break the ice. Okay, and I could continue questioning them. Yeah, thank you, Xavier Giró. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pay something later on to Xavier, a sort of incentive or something, just to, not in EU money, that will be personal money. That's for sure.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. If you want to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Well, just, I'm teaching political journalism and a few more things around critical discourse analysis and conflict and media and all that. That's why you will understand the second part of my questions. The first one is, in one aspect, you spoke about participation. I don't disagree, yes, but I think participation is not enough, because we have seen also a lot of participation in some of the social and political and economic processes that take us to a cul-de-sac, yes? So to participate for what for? Nothing changes at the end. Then if nothing changes, situations are not solved properly. Therefore comes frustration. Put it at the level you like. That's one thing. The other thing, it's related to media. Where is the role of media in all this? One of the points is digitalization. I understand this is related to social networks and all that. But what's the role of mainstream media in your countries? How much, for instance, youth, and not just youth, people don't feel reflected on those media? How media build or don't build a sense of community? We have sense of community not just at mezzo level, also an upper level. If you have the sense of community, you look for community solutions, which is at the other end of the extreme violent solutions. Well, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Xavier. I don't know if there is any other question, or we start answering this one. Any reaction? Thank you, Tasnim.
So thank you for your question. You were looking at me, so I gathered it's addressed to me. So for the first part of your question, you talked about participation. Well, I didn't want to go into details about why and how participation, blocked participation, leads to radicalization. Here, the issue is not about participation per se, but when the channels, the normal channels for expressing anger, the deep sense of unfairness and injustice is channeled into, positive, initiatives for change, expressing, discontent, expressing it in a healthy way in dialogue platforms, engaging with decision makers. That's the sort of participation I'm talking about. So in closed environments and contexts, the blocked participation and the impossibility of reform really leads to, it's an environment that is conducive to violence. So this is the sort of participation I'm talking about. I'm talking about the lack of participation and the absence of participation, what it gives. But also there's another side to participation, which is agency. So agency is very important because here in Europe, participation is quite available to everyone. We don't realize its importance. But in my country, for example, in Tunisia, in the past, Tunisia produced an important number of, fighters who went to, places, where there were violent extremism. Agency is actually the other side of the radicalized process. How? When you give young people the opportunity to express themselves, to engage in meaningful participation, in meaningful expression of initiatives for change, that gives them empowerment, and that protects them, from the radicalization. What happens with the radical discourse is that they are given recognition, they are given, dignity and responsibility also within a group, and that responsibility is the other side of the blocked agency they cannot have. So this is why participation becomes very important in this context as a way of, PVE programming. For the second aspect of your question about media, are you asking about the particular context of Tunisia, or? Well, I'll let someone else answer that then.
Shall I go? No, I think the point that participation is not enough is very important. Now, in the case of Egypt, that also is reflected in the changing nature of the media environment in general. So I remember the first time I was going to Egypt before the revolution, the big thing was private satellite TV channels. And the latest figures, I think, is that the average person in the country, so including also the average between like young people and elderly, spends 3 hours a day on TV and 8 hours a day getting information through the internet on their phone, for most of them. Now, that raises two sorts of questions. So if the medium is the message, if we want, then, and there's a colleague who said it in the academic setting, but only simplified narratives usually make it through certain types of media channels, as we know. So there's an element there when it comes also to the role of religion, the extent to which it leads to a simplification of the way in which information are conveyed. But the issue of participation comes back here, it's crucial. There's a large extent to which I think it was just made by hand. So the expression and the articulation of political grievances ended up being done in essentially the same way as was done in the 19th century. So again, you need both, but there's a sense to which the political element requires that step forward. And sometimes, yes, sometimes certain ways of conveying information can be an obstacle to effective political mobilization.
I don't know if you want to add something else, but in fact, with the issue of digital consumerism as a driver, we were discussing this very morning to what extent it was detachable from the transnational dynamics driver that we had already identified. Okay, but one thing which is clear is that social media and the role of social media in the field of violent extremism and radicalization has been one of the main focus of research these last years. And this is why it might also provide quite an interesting literature to the project. Then we will see, after the end of the research, if that driver stands out as a driver per se, or it stands out as a driver in combination with other elements or with other drivers. Okay? Concerning the role of media, I mean, media will be an additional actor in the field of stakeholders that have a say, particularly in the field of constructing narratives. And obviously, we might think to what extent media can eventually become elements or vectors of polarization. Okay? And this is, for example, we see it very clearly in Europe with the issues of Islamophobia, etc., in very extreme and far-right media outlets, okay, and to what extent they feed extremist ideas. But in this case, we want to see this digital consumerism as an element, as a driver per se, okay, or as a variable that interacts with other drivers, and this will be the key. And media will be a sort of another actor that will have to be included in this approach, okay, in order to analyze. I don't know if there are any other questions, issues. Yes, Mercè, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation and the opportunity to be here. What I would like to know is if you could expand a bit more maybe on the educational driver, because I don't see that you have touched on it very deeply, and I think that it's important to take into account the constraints that maybe some education policies can have in the development of this community, this sense of community, also on competence, not only in terms of knowledge, but in terms of competencies that are developed also at the class level when at young ages, and so that make these communities more empowered and individuals also more, developing their sense of belonging to a certain community. And also in relation with textbooks and references, gender references, historical references, etc. No? So just if you have a couple of ideas.
Does anyone want to have some? Yes, please.
Okay, we didn't specifically work on educational drivers, but there's an angle from which I can answer this question. As exactly like individuals, are cut off in the process of radicalization, are cut off from their community, and identify themselves in opposition to the community, and the religious authorities are discredited. Also, the communities are they construct a subnational identity that becomes built on exclusion itself. So what we noticed working in comparative, communities is that, in some regions the exclusion is so deep that when you ask them whether they belong to the country, the nation, belong to Tunisia, there's a very, very low level of belonging, one, and secondly, very low level of trust in everything that is national and official institutions. In opposition to this, the sense of belonging to the group, belonging to the neighborhood, everything that is very, very local is very strong. So this is actually, how can we deal with this on the policy level? I think here national education becomes very important in giving equal access to everyone, and here where also public education becomes important in constructing national identities and providing young people with the necessary repertoire to belong to the country. Because, you know, not just the identity is constructed on this exclusion, but also a typical language is constructed, and typical ways of being based on rejection of the police, rejection of everything that is, you know, of a national level. So I think here education becomes very important, not as a driver, but from this angle, as a prevention, you know, or counterbalancing the effect of isolation and self-exclusion of these subcultures.
For me, what is interesting also is in this field, not only seeing educational opportunities, but also cultural opportunities and leisure opportunities. I mean, we have invested, or we have repeated a lot, sometimes I might even guess somehow empty of research, how important a football trainer might be to avoid radicalization, etc. But we have researched very little on what is the needs for young people to occupy their time. But I will remember with me, my colleague, our partner from North Macedonia, one of our partners from North Macedonia, when we were traveling together in a project across the US, and we had a colleague from Belgium, from Vilvoorde, who explained how, I mean, they were a group of friends that were really bored and had no chances at all to occupy their time outside school or out and without work. So he told us, okay, all my colleagues left to Syria at one point. We were extremely bored and we had no chances to do that. The village next to us, the mayor saw that, established a youth center, and from the neighboring village, nobody left to Syria. And from my village, all my colleagues left. And this is something that might seem very superficial, but at the same, I think it's very little research and very interesting. To what extent, I mean, youth, and this might help us also connect with the needs of youth. Sometimes we might think this is not relevant. The only important thing is the curricula at school. But there are other fields of life that are also important. And when school ends, there's a huge abysm there. And this is what we are going also to deal with. Yes?
Good morning. Thank you very much. First, congratulations to all of you for setting up this project. It looks very exciting. So my question is more methodological. You've dealt with the mezzo level and with how this level interplays with the micro and the mezzo level. So my question is, how do you plan to get to the mezzo level, to the communities? I mean, what will be the project's methodology? And I'm referring especially to empirical research.
Do you want to, I mean, there are any other questions we might join, or we answer this one? Okay, do you want to, yeah, I go? Okay, so the methodology is like that. We will start analyzing the macro drivers. Okay, the macro drivers will be literature review, but at the same time will be consultations with the stakeholders, interviews, etc., so that we can draw the picture. And once we have drawn the picture, through a process which is participatory, it does not only involve the people from the consortium, but also other relevant stakeholders and scholars, we will decide per country 3 case studies, which will allow us to lower down the research to be applied into 3 meso contexts, which will be these 3 case studies per country. Then once this phase has been done, we will go to micro elements, micro drivers, okay? So the research will be focused on micro drivers. The meso drivers will be analyzed methodologically through focus groups and in-depth interviews mainly, okay? And targeting young people from 12 to 30 years old. And then the micro drivers will be analyzed through a surveying campaign per country, okay? Once we will have this picture, which is this sort of cartography of the macro, meso, micro, we will go back to the meso, okay? And from these 3 previous case studies, we select 2, in which we will focus in obtaining information, knowledge on prevention. So we will ask again through focus groups and through in-depth interviews to young people, but not what makes you think radical, but what do you think might be helpful for you in your future? So the idea is we're going to research on prevention. And finally, the final stage is within one case study, one meso-context of these 2 and 3 previously analyzed and studied, we will start the first implementation of the prevention measures that we will create. Okay? So the idea is from research into a first application of the tools that the research will provide and the first testing of these tools at a community level. And this will be done through a participatory approach. So each phase ends with a great meeting involving stakeholders, involving relevant actors in order to decide which will be the focus of the study on the next stages. I don't know if this was clear. Yes, please, Marco.
I think it's a very valid point because at the methodological level, it's a sort of a nightmare scenario when you have to do that. I was part of a European project in the recent past where we looked at the role of media, engagement with media in democratization processes. And we had a number of case studies. What we ended up having, so like in this case, you have whatever, 6 or 7 drivers, and you're having 3 case studies, as Lutz has said, you will end up exactly because you want to keep the element of diversity by country, you end up allowing the countries or the team leaders for the countries to choose what is most relevant to explore those dynamics. And then what you do is that you map them against those dynamics. So you might end up that a country has, of those 3 cases, gives you an interesting example of, well, in our case, for instance, for that project about elections, because it's about democratizations, for others civic engagement, but perhaps another country looking at elections is not particularly relevant because whatever, in the case of Egypt, elections are not particularly relevant politically. So you make sure that across the project you cover all of these different dynamics while giving, and this is I think the reason for those 3 cases, giving each country the choice essentially of which drivers essentially they want to focus on. And then when you go back and you do just, like you're looking at how to impact on those, obviously you have to be a bit more selective because as we say in research, you know, the more cases you have, the fewer variables you need to have. So in this case, if you want to add the number of variables, you will have to decrease the number of cases. So if you want to understand more what can be done, you cannot do it on all 24 cases. It's a nightmare scenario. It has been done before, and I think we want to keep that balance between covering all of these different dynamics and giving each team the chance to focus on what is specific to their country, so that we don't have this superimposed model being applied uniformly across the board.
Yeah, one of the things that we wanted to do is not conceiving this project with preconceived ideas. So where are we going to go? In Morocco, we're going to go to the banlieue in Casablanca. In Tunisia, we're going to go to the border with Algeria. So we didn't want to work with these preconceived ideas of where are we going to find our community context, where to work with. And this is why we have the previous phases to inform that final decision. And that final decision of the selection of case studies might respond to the specificities of each country. I don't know if there are any other doubts, questions. I don't know if there are any other. Otherwise, I will thank you all for being here. I will encourage you all to subscribe to the Connekt newsletter because this is the way we can keep you updated of our work. We thank you a lot for coming with us and supporting us in this launching of the project, and hope that you keep posted with the results of the research. And well, I am sure that we will find other excuses to meet each other again. Thank you very much, and see you next discussion. Thanks a lot. Thank you. It was very helpful. It's good because we have. Thank you, Marco. Thank you.